Hey everyone, and welcome back. Let's dive straight into this explainer of Asokamitran's brilliant, ironic, and honestly incredibly observant memoir, Poets and Pancakes. If you're revising the golden era of the South Indian film industry, or if you're just fascinated by that stark contrast between glittering appearances and gritty, behind-the-scenes reality, you are absolutely in the right place. We're going to explore the colorful, bustling, and sometimes completely absurd world of Gemini Studios in Madras during the mid-20th century.
Here is what we're looking at today. Welcome to Gemini Studios, the makeup department, Subbu versus the office boy, the illegal advisor, a baffling British visitor, and finally, the core themes of the memoir. Let's jump right in.
Right out of the gate, Asokamitran completely shatters this illusion of cinematic glamour. When we think of movie stars, we automatically think of flawless beauty, right? But he points out that the process was actually a literal, fiery misery under blazing incandescent lights. Actors were actively made to look hideous in person, just so they would appear presentable on black and white cameras.
Which actually brings us to a major mystery right in the title. Pancake? Yeah, it wasn't a breakfast food, it was literally the brand name of a heavy, thick stage paint that Gemini Studios imported in massive truckloads. It's the exact same makeup famously used by global stars like Greta Garbo and Miss Gohar. So, right from the jump, we're introduced to the highly manufactured, artificial nature of the film business.
Okay, let's head over to the makeup department, a nationally integrated misery.
So this department was actually set up upstairs in a building that people believed used to be Robert Clive's stables. And here's what's so cool. Long before we had national broadcasts on All India Radio or Doordarshan, Gemini Studios had this prime example of national unity. You had this incredibly diverse crew, led at various times by a Bengali, then a Maharashtrian, assisted by professionals from Dharwar, Andhra, Madras, and Burma. They were a gang of nationally integrated makeup men, all united in their shared task of turning actors into crimson-hued monsters.
Now, the crucial point to remember here is that even inside this chaotic, creative movie studio, things were strictly regulated. They maintained a rigid corporate hierarchy just for makeup. The status of the actor completely dictated the status of the makeup artist. The chief makeup man handled the main stars, all the way down the ladder to a position that Asokamitran highlights with total irony: the office boy, whose sole job was painting the crowd players.
Moving along, we've got a classic clash of ambitions, Subbu versus the office boy.
This dynamic perfectly illustrates two wildly different workplace mindsets. On one side, you have the office boy. Now, he wasn't a boy at all. He was this frustrated guy in his early 40s who had joined the studio hoping to be a top star or a director or a lyricist. Because he failed, he was bitter and he blamed all of his woes on Kothamangalam Subbu. Subbu, on the other hand, was the number 2 at the studio. He was a humble, highly adaptable, and phenomenally cheerful guy who simply made himself completely indispensable to the boss.
To give you an idea of just how indispensable Subbu was, if the producer hit a creative wall and didn't know how to shoot a complicated scene, Subbu would instantly pitch 4 different ways to do it. And if the boss still wasn't thrilled, bam, Subbu would rattle off 14 alternative ideas on the spot. His creative energy was entirely channeled into serving his principal, which is exactly why he thrived while others didn't.
Meanwhile, you've got this bitter office boy, totally convinced of his own unrecognized genius, literally stuck doing manual labor. On crowd shooting days, he's mixing vats of this pancake makeup and just slapping it onto the faces of hundreds of extras, trying to close every single pore. It is such a tragicomic image, right? Just slapping paint onto crowds while dreaming of writing high poetry and directing blockbusters.
Next up, let's step into the story department and meet the illegal advisor, cold logic, and a crowd of dreamers.
So our narrator, Asokamitran, spent his days here quietly cutting newspaper clippings. But from his desk, he observed a very peculiar lawyer. While all the writers and poets in the department were walking around in simple khadi dhotis, total idealists and Gandhiites, right? This lawyer dressed in sharp Western clothes. Pants, a tie, and sometimes a coat that looked almost like a coat of mail. He stood out as a pragmatic realist, a man of absolute cold logic surrounded by dreamers. And ironically, despite officially being the legal advisor, his mischief earned him the nickname of the illegal advisor.
And here is exactly why he earned that title. One day, a talented but kind of temperamental country girl actress threw a massive tantrum at the producer. What does the lawyer do? He quietly switches on the sound recording equipment. Then, he plays her own angry tirade right back to her. The sheer shock of hearing her own voice played back through the studio equipment struck her completely dumb. She just never recovered her confidence, and her brilliant acting career was abruptly, permanently ended by his cold, unfeeling efficiency.
All right, let's pivot to a baffling British visitor where poetry meets pancakes.
Gemini Studios was a place of extreme contrasts. I mean, they hosted the International Moral Rearmament Army, who put on these elaborate anti-communist plays like Jotham Valley. But another international visitor left the staff completely and utterly confused. It was a bizarre collision of two totally different worlds, literary high art and commercial, pancake-slathered film production. The employees knew the world of cinema for sure, but they were about to be forcefully introduced to a world they knew absolutely nothing about.
The boss literally clears an entire shooting stage to welcome a poet from England. Now keep in mind, the staff only knows names like Wordsworth or Tennyson, maybe Keats. The boss gives this grand welcome speech, literally battling half a dozen pedestal fans blowing wind everywhere around him. But when the guest finally speaks, his heavy British accent is so thick that absolutely nobody understands a single word he says. The audience was baffled, the poet was baffled, and it just remained an unsolved mystery for years.
But years later, this builds to a fantastic punchline. Long after Asokamitran had left the studios, he's browsing a pavement bookstall and buys a heavily discounted book called The God That Failed, which is a collection of essays about disillusionment with communism. He looks at the list of authors and boom, there it is, Stephen Spender. It was the exact same editor of the Encounter periodical he'd noticed earlier, and the very same mysterious guest who had baffled Gemini Studios. The cultural disconnect was finally bridged.
So, what does this all mean? Let's wrap up with the core themes of the memoir.
The whole explainer we've just gone through brilliantly juxtaposes a few key takeaways you really need for your exams. We see the artificial glamour manufactured by the literal pancake makeup, contrasting with the grueling, sweaty labor of the diverse studio employees. We see Subbu's success through humble service versus the office boy's bitter entitlement. And, of course, we see the hilarious cultural gap between Stephen Spender's high literature and the studio's commercial mass entertainment. It's all about the layers beneath the surface.
As you head into your final revision and look beyond the textbook, I want you to ask yourself this. When you look at today's glamorous industries, be it modern cinema, social media, or the tech world, what hidden realities, bitter office boys, cheerful subrus, and unsung heroes are you missing beneath the surface? Keep observing, because as Asokamitran shows us, the reality behind the scenes is almost always more fascinating than the movie itself.